was around 2 a.m. when I got the ping for a ride. I'd been doing late-night rideshare driving for a few months to make extra money, and to be honest, I usually didn't mind it. The roads were clear, and the tips were good for those long, lonely hours. But this ride would turn out to be one of the strangest and most unsettling experiences I've ever had. The pickup was at a quiet part of town, away from the hustle and bustle. I arrived at the location, and there was a man standing on the curb, looking like he'd been waiting a while. He was wearing a dark jacket and jeans, and he had a hood pulled low over his head. I opened the passenger door, and he slid in without saying a word, just nodding at me when I greeted him. I didn't think much of it at first. Late-night riders are usually quiet, and that's fine by me. But this guy, something about him felt off. I started driving, and before I could even pull onto the main road, he told me to take a specific route, one that was far more isolated and much longer than what I normally took. At first, I thought maybe he had a reason. Maybe he was trying to avoid traffic. But the route he gave me seemed out of the way, especially considering there were faster, more direct routes. I glanced at the GPS to make sure I wasn't missing something. But no, this was definitely taking me farther from the city center. I decided to ask him, trying to keep things casual. "Are you sure this is the quickest way? The other route's much faster." He immediately insisted, almost too forcefully. "No, this is the one. Trust me." That made me uneasy. Why was he being so insistent about a random route? I kept my eyes on the road, but I could feel my pulse quickening. I tried to engage him in conversation, hoping to distract myself from the unsettling vibe, but he barely responded. Just one-word answers. It was like I wasn't even talking to a person, but some kind of ghost. The further we went, the more deserted the area got. No other cars, no streetlights, just miles of empty road. And that's when I started to get a bad feeling. A gut feeling, you know? I couldn't shake the thought that something wasn't right. At one point, we were out in a stretch of road that looked like something out of a horror movie. Tall, dark trees on either side. Not a house in sight for miles. I didn't want to outright refuse to drive him where he wanted to go. But I had to do something. I started planning. I knew I couldn't just turn around and leave, but I also didn't want to drive deeper into the middle of nowhere with no cell service and no one around. I figured I'd pretend like I was pulling over at a busy intersection and see how he reacted. Maybe he would ask to go somewhere else, or even bail out of the ride, if he wasn't up to anything shady. So, I made a left turn and headed toward a part of town I knew had more streetlights and activity. I didn't even check to see if he noticed at first. I just kept driving, hoping to stall him long enough to get somewhere more populated. Just as I slowed down near a well-lit street, he suddenly jerked upright. "This is where I get off," he said, his voice now sounding more urgent than before. Before I could say a word, he pushed the door open and got out, fast, like he was in a hurry. He didn't even give me a chance to say anything or confirm the address. He just closed the door with a click and disappeared into the night, walking briskly toward the alley nearby. I watched him go, feeling a weird sense of relief mixed with confusion. It didn't make sense. If this guy had wanted to get out at this intersection, why had he insisted on that odd, out-of-the-way route? Why was he so intent on going that way? I waited for a few minutes, checking my GPS again, making sure he hadn't somehow tricked me into taking a route that was somehow connected to him. But no, everything looked normal. I just couldn't shake the feeling of something being very wrong. The next morning, I checked the news, and that's when it hit me like a ton of bricks. The man I had driven the night before wasn't just some random passenger. He was involved in multiple criminal activities, including a string of robberies and violent assaults in the area. The police had been looking for him for weeks, and it turned out that he was part of a gang that had been operating in the area, using the cover of night to commit crimes and disappear without a trace. The route he had insisted on taking? It led to a series of abandoned warehouses where the gang had been using as hideouts. The whole thing hit me hard. I had unknowingly driven a criminal to his destination, and if I hadn't sensed something was off, who knows what might have happened next. I can't even begin to explain how lucky I feel that I trusted my instincts and pretended to drop him in a more populated area. I don't know what his plan was, but I'm sure it wasn't good. Maybe he was scoping out a place, or maybe he intended to do something to me. All I know is that if I had driven any farther, if I had just done what he wanted without questioning it, I might not be telling this story today. It was well past midnight when I was on my way home from a long work shift at a small distribution center outside Calgary, Alberta. I had just finished up a 12-hour shift and had a long drive ahead of me. The highway I was on is pretty quiet this late at night. Nothing but dark stretches of road and the occasional truck speeding past in the opposite direction. I didn't mind it though. I was used to the loneliness of the road. My headlights were the only source of light for miles, and I was just thinking about getting home, catching some sleep, and starting my next shift the next day. But then, about 20 minutes into the drive, I saw something that made my stomach drop. A bunch of large, heavy-looking logs were scattered across the highway, blocking my lane. My first thought was that a truck had spilled them, but there was no sign of the vehicle, no lights, nothing. I slowed my car and pulled over to the shoulder of the road. I stared at the logs for a moment, thinking it through. It wasn't safe to leave them there, and there wasn't another car in sight to help me. I had no choice but to move them off the road. So I got out of the car, popped the trunk, and grabbed a crowbar I kept in the back in case I ever needed it. I was trying to figure out how to clear a path when I heard a rustling sound from the bushes on the side of the road. My first instinct was to ignore it, maybe an animal, right? But then the rustling turned into footsteps. I froze. Someone was out there. I looked around trying to see who it was, but the darkness of the night made it impossible. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw two figures emerging from the bushes. Both were wearing dark clothing and masks. They were moving quickly, too quickly for comfort. I knew exactly what was going on. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't some random incident. These two men had planned it. They were using the logs as a trap to stop unsuspecting drivers, and now they were coming for me. My heart started pounding. I dropped the crowbar and backed up toward my car, my mind racing. They hadn't said anything, but the look in their eyes told me everything. One of them had a knife in his hand, the other a metal bar. I reached for the door handle, but it felt like it took forever. My hands were shaking, my heart hammering in my chest. I managed to get the door open and slam it shut, locking the doors as quickly as I could. The men were getting closer, but I couldn't think. I just had to get away. I put the car in reverse and slammed on the gas, the tires screeching as I reversed back down the road, away from the men. I couldn't look in the rearview mirror. I was too scared to see if they were following me. I floored the gas pedal, speeding up and turning down the next side road I could find. I didn't stop until I reached the first gas station I saw, nearly 10 miles away. My hands were still shaking as I got out of the car, my breath ragged. I rushed inside and told the attendant what happened, trying to keep my voice steady. The gas station clerk immediately called the police, and within minutes, a local sheriff arrived. I explained the situation again, and he took me seriously. They sent a couple of deputies out to investigate the area, but when they returned, they had nothing. No sign of the men, no logs, no evidence at all. At first, I thought I was going crazy. Had I imagined the whole thing? But the sheriff wasn't convinced. He told me he'd heard reports of similar incidents in that area over the past couple of weeks. Drivers being stopped by debris on the highway, only to have masked men try to rob them. Apparently, these men were part of a larger ring of highway robbers who targeted drivers late at night. It wasn't just me. They'd been doing it to others for weeks. But because they were so quick and careful, they never got caught. The police took my statement and assured me that they'd increase patrols on that stretch of road. But honestly, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd been lucky. I kept thinking about how close I had come to being one of their victims. I never drove that stretch of highway at night again. And whenever I pass through that area now, I feel a wave of unease wash over me. I keep my eyes open, always scanning the road for anything out of place. It was one of those incidents that, at the time, seemed almost surreal. But in the end, I got out alive. And I'll never forget how quickly everything could have gone wrong. I never thought a late-night drive could go so wrong. It started out like any other. Just me, the road, and the hum of my car at 2 a.m., trying to clear my head after a rough week. I'd been feeling a bit off, but the silence on the road was calming. The kind of solitude where your thoughts feel like they belong to you again, instead of everyone else. I was on this long, deserted stretch of highway. Nothing but fields on either side, broken up by the occasional, crooked streetlight that barely lit anything. It's the kind of place where you can go miles without seeing a single soul. That's why, when I saw headlights in my rearview mirror, I didn't think much of it at first. The car behind me wasn't speeding up or tailgating. It was just there. I didn't recognize the make or model, just a pair of headlights, almost too bright, too focused. The kind of light that makes you feel like you're under a spotlight, but without the warmth. A few miles went by. The car stayed there, but now I could hear it. The engine was revving in a way that wasn't normal. It was like they were intentionally trying to stay right behind me. I told myself to relax. Maybe they were just trying to pass. Maybe it was just a coincidence. But then, I took a turn, and so did they. It wasn't a sharp turn, just a bend in the road, but I felt my heart start to pick up pace. They didn't pass. They didn't slow down. It was like they were matching every move I made. I tried to keep my breathing steady, but it wasn't working. My palms were sweating on the wheel, and I glanced over at the clock on my dashboard. 2:15 a.m. I sped up a little, so did they. I slowed down, thinking maybe I could lose them by making random turns. They mirrored me again. That's when I saw it. Up ahead, I noticed an old, rundown gas station. I knew the place. It was the kind of spot that looked like it hadn't been open in years. Still, there was a light on in the corner, flickering. I took the exit towards it, but the car behind me didn't follow. I pulled into the lot, quickly parked near the pumps, and turned off my engine. I didn't know what I was expecting, but I sat there for a while, watching the highway, waiting for them to pass. But they never did. The silence was deafening. I finally reached for my phone. My hands were shaking. 911 was all I could think of. I dialed the number, but the moment it started ringing, I felt a chill shoot up my spine. I looked out my window. The headlights. They were back. Only now, they weren't moving. They were just sitting there, waiting, watching. My chest was tight, and for a second, I couldn't breathe. The 911 operator picked up on the other end, her voice calm. 911, what's your emergency? I could barely get the words out. There's someone, they're following me. I think they're waiting outside. She was still professional, but there was a hint of urgency in her tone. Stay on the line. Lock your doors. Where are you? I quickly gave her the location of the gas station, but my mind was elsewhere. I couldn't stop staring at those headlights. The longer I stared, the more I felt like I was being pulled into them, like I wasn't supposed to leave. Then, they disappeared. The car wasn't there anymore. I don't know if it drove off, or if it just melted into the night, but the lot was empty. For a split second, I thought I might be imagining it, until I saw the figure standing by the pumps. I couldn't see their face, but I could feel their eyes on me, even from a distance. Stay calm, the operator told me, her voice a little sharper now. The police are on their way. Just stay inside. I didn't need to be told twice. I locked the doors and kept my eyes on the figure, hoping the police would get there fast enough. Minutes felt like hours, but eventually, the sirens came. The figure vanished, and the lights were no longer in my rearview mirror. I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't pulled into that gas station. I don't know what that person wanted, But I do know one thing. Not all late-night drives are as peaceful as they seem.